To begin another conversation about the work of evangelism. We'll be starting the core of our discussion for today at the top of the hour, but as we have been doing for the last couple months, we're doing our soft open. And Terry, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. It's a little chilly. I had to pull out some extra layers, to even cozy up inside the home. It's weird how you can still have all that temperature control, and yet when the house full temperature changes outside, it really does kind of create the temperature
Yeah,
changes
even your
inside.
warm is colder when it gets this cold outside. Like 60 degrees in your house is a lot colder now than it was yesterday when it was 70. It's just
Right.
crazy how that goes.
I'm sure there's somebody who can explain the physics of how HVAC systems interact with the world. But bottom line, when it's cold outside, I seem to be more susceptible to the cold inside. Anyway, um, so in about 5 or 6 minutes, we're going to talk about teaching. But before we do that, and teachers, and a couple related matters, here's a question for everyone today. One for me too. And I was thinking about this. What's one movie that you like that people would be surprised that you like?
Wow.
It's kind of the counter thing that because there's some movies I choose to never see. That
Like Lord of the Rings, I'll never watch Lord of the Rings. I think that's a clearly established principle that everybody knows
right,
by now.
right. I will never see either of the two Frozens. I've never seen either any of the Twilight movies. Just
Yeah.
not
So you're
interested at
not Team
all.
Edward or Team Jacob, huh?
I'm Team Nope.
Team Nope?
Yeah. Um, my daughter has watched some of the first one, and her comment recently was that the acting was so awful it was laughable. So it's like
Well,
Mystery Science, 3000. And she's like, "What's that?" So now we had a good little cultural
yeah,
conversation
let's
about that.
not let's not get into that because I got into a whole lot of trouble when I was like during the Twilight series because I told some of the women at church, how would y'all feel if me and your husbands went and watched a series of movies and we divided ourselves up over which chick was hotter? How would you feel about that? I got a lot of trouble about that.
Terry getting in
Anyway,
trouble.
yeah, who imagine that? Imagine me, something I
Yeah,
say upsetting people. Wow, that's just a novel concept.
yeah.
Yeah, so Daryl, it's not that I can't stand Lord of the Rings, it's that I've never seen Lord of the Rings, and I refuse to because everybody tells me that I have to. I even had a cousin that told me I couldn't fully understand the gospel story unless I watched it, which was like, now I will never watch it for sure. A movie that I like, okay, I got one because it's a chick flick. Like, I'm not a chick flick guy. Like, I'm a guy that, if Remember the Titans, Hoosiers, Bloodsport, any of those things come on like TNT, especially the edited versions right on TNT or TBS. Those are some of the reruns. Hitch, you're gonna catch me watching those like for the umpteenth millionth time because it's just like funny stuff. It's exciting stuff. Like Bloodsport's one of my favorites when it comes on, especially on TV because it's edited, but it makes you feel like you can like go out and, let's be honest, beat somebody up. Like, yeah, I could do those splits too. No, I can't. But you feel that way by the time you watch that movie. Sweet Home Alabama. Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was. I don't
Reese Witherspoon.
choose to
Yep.
watch any of the Hallmark movies. I enjoy watching them in some ways with my family because it's a familial experience, but I don't. I would never seek them out. And yet, um, I would probably also watch Sweet Home Alabama just as a second or third time. I know we've watched that a few
Dude,
times.
yeah, the dog
Um,
alone in there is super cool, right? I mean, you got the dog, the biplane, the guy. That's the whole thing. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's a chick flick.
yeah. Oh,
I
oh,
even get
and
cracked up, by the way, the Civil War reenactment scenes make me laugh. Like, I
yeah,
love the things. Like, where the guys are like, he's dead. Oh, he's over there. I mean, it's the funniest thing ever. It's great.
yeah. And on a literary level, a lot of the reveals in there are a little bit more surprising than the tropes that tend to appear in that genre of rom-coms where everyone's kind of fitting their role and you know who they are. And so I would say, um, you know, um, I also enjoy most of the Air Bud movies, not
Oh,
not because they're quality
dude.
movies, but here's the simple.
What?
All of those things are also in the quality of so bad, but when my kids were young, they loved them, and I loved their responses to them.
Yeah.
Um,
Adam Shelton says Jeremiah Johnson. Look, Jeremiah Johnson, nobody would be surprised if Phil and I were watching Jeremiah Johnson. Like, that's not like a surprise, right? It's like the Man from Snowy River. If you tell me, like, if I go, hey, have you seen the Man from Snowy River, Return of Snowy River? Like, nobody's going to be surprised from that. What's cooler than a guy jumping off the side of a mountain on a horse? Give me a break. That's man stuff. But it's the chick flick stuff. By the way, I got a special place in my heart for Reese Witherspoon. She's a Nashvilleian. Right? Her dad's a doctor in Nashville. In fact, I think it was one of the kids maybe that saw him. He's an optometrist for kids. Like we've met her dad. I don't know how that, remember exactly. One of the kids saw him, I believe it was. Yeah.
All right, top of the hour. We got to do our stuff now.
Got to do our stuff.
Here's the thing. Our subject for today is a little bit of a challenge. It's challenging, at least for me, to think through on a couple of levels. We're talking about the various aspects of teaching in a congregational context. And so we're going to narrow our scope. And teaching in a congregational context when maybe the evangelist or the preacher is not the one doing the teaching, how does our role fit into that space? And the challenges are kind of all over the place. Like, here's one, like how much to participate from the chair, the pew, like what role do I have there? Part two is what role do I have on the helping that teacher prepare side? And part three, at least as I think through it, would be once they're prepared, what are my expectations for that class going forward? Whether I am a participant in the class or maybe I'm involved in the overall teaching process in other corners. There's a lot of questions that you can ask that are really good questions. And I want to throw that back to our audience and say, hey, if you got good questions in this area of like, how do I participate as a student in these classes, as an evangelist who's maybe taught this class 5, 10, 15 times, on some subjects, that's easily the case. How do I help folks prepare for that experience, and what do I expect? And so any of those questions you guys might come up with that would be good questions to consider, drop them in the chats that are associated with the video, and send us a message. We're happy to interact with those in that way as well. So Terry, go ahead. What's your first thoughts on our first part of this question, perhaps? And you can do any order you want to.
Well, I think where this is motivated by a guy that sent me a message about what do we expect as the preacher when we're not teaching the class? Like, what do we expect out of the teacher? That kind of what motivated the class and this discussion today. So I ought to start off. One of the things I don't expect for you to do necessarily is to write your own material. I don't expect you to do that. I'll be honest, I kind of at this point have an expectation of preachers to develop their own material just because I think it's better for you. But for the non-preacher, I don't expect that. Now, I've got people here. I got a couple of guys here. They write all their own material. It's great. It's fantastic. But I will say this. The main thing I expect is you just put some effort into it, right? Like you may be given material. Maybe I wrote it. Maybe somebody else wrote it. I don't want to feel like that you just got up there without any preparation and you're just more of a traffic cop than a teacher. And so that's where I would start. So how do you do that? I think just real quickly, a couple things maybe we've said some of this before. Phil and I both are big believers in when you get ready to teach something, you should read. If you're going to teach a book for a quarter, like let's say the Gospel of Luke, the first thing you do is to read through Luke completely a couple of times before you do anything else. And by the way, side note to churches, elderships, give your teachers more than a quarter of preparation time for this. I think one of the problems we have sometimes is we're like, hey, we got a quarter start next week and we need teachers. And then this guy's thrown up there with like 6 days of preparation because, well, quite frankly, because the leadership does a poor job of planning. Plan your classes so many quarters in advance. Now, COVID has messed that up for us. We're trying to, because we don't even know when regular classes are going to start and all that stuff. But under normal conditions, plan those things normally a couple quarters in advance. 6 to 12 month preparation time. So if you're the teacher, take some time to read through that book a couple times before you look at a commentary, before you do anything, right, Phil? I think you're the same way. Read through it. My advice on that is, if you can, get your hands on the letter, the gospel, the book, whatever it is, without the chapter notations and the verse notations if you can. Read it like a book. If you have the reader's editions, Read it from there. If not, download it. Like a lot of places you can download and you can take those things out. If you have Logos, you can take all of that out and you can read it without divisions. Read the context. That's the very first step. Get the whole picture of the letter. And I tell you where that first came to view for me was I was teaching Revelation a couple years ago, and the first thing we did as a class, we read the letter, the whole Revelation in class. We didn't have any discussion. We just read that thing as it would have been read originally. Completely perspective changing in how you do. So that's the first thing you do. You read through all of that. And then, Phil, you start looking at the sections. Once you read it all, you come up with kind of an overall idea. What was the point of this book? And then you read the sections and you plug that back in to how those sections re-emphasize or emphasize this theme of the book. So like when you and I were leading the study through 2 Corinthians, so much of that book is about Paul defending his apostleship. So you have to read those sections always connecting back to that kind of thought, right? But you got to understand that's a thought before you even start looking at stuff. So all I really expect from you is some effort. And I think that's the main thing. And we could tell you a lot of stuff, but that kind of gets you started.
Yeah, so on the effort side of things, we'll kind of go backwards then from this point, like what the expectations are, because there's some great comments too I want to address in the chat as well. One, read the text. If nothing else, reading the text regularly in preparation and as a core component. If you're doing a class that's about a book of the Bible, you should read the book of the Bible in the class to a varying degree. I realize time might come into play and all that, but you should actually be reading the text in the class. So read the text in advance, plan to read the text in the class, and then have a plan for each of the classes.
Yes.
And so what I mean by that is pretty simplified. Let's say you have 9 sessions and you have whatever amount of content that you need to display in those 9 sessions. Plan it out. Take a little time with a napkin, a piece of paper, a notebook, whatever way you want to use, break it out. In those things, you're going to build some questions that you want to answer. And with that, and this is not age group specific, by the way, this goes all the way down to working with the youngest ages to the most mature spiritual minds. You're still going to have a need for a plan. It may be as simple as 1 chapter a week. That's way better than, well, we're just going to let the text flow and we're going to spend a week on 1 verse and next week on 2 chapters because no one said anything in the class. No, you need a plan.
Let me say this, Phil. This is the way I explained to guys on that. This because it's a big deal, because this is how classes last for 4 years on the book of Acts. Every class, you need to know where your stopping point is supposed to be. That's what Phil's saying. I'm going to get to verse whatever at the end of this class. And that may mean with 8 minutes to go, you realize you've got 10 verses to cover, and you cover those 10 verses in 8 minutes. But you have a plan, and you stick to it, and you get to a stopping point, because you say, here's the stopping point, period. And that, honestly, has to be non-negotiable in your planning. So that's to me is the best way to explain what Phil's saying. This is what you have to cover in this class, no matter what. And that's really important.
Right. And for me, and I've shared this before, I'll share it again. I have a very simple framework that I'm trying to approach each of my classes with. I use this in home studies, and I'm going to drop it in the main Do the Work Facebook chat in a second. And it's pretty familiar. It includes a series of questions as well. One, I'm going to try to make it simple, accurate, and memorable. The course of the class is going to be simple, accurate, and memorable. In the teaching of it, I'm probably going to try to tell the story 3 different ways. The first time is so that folks can try to figure out a way to imagine the events. The second time is so that they can remember it. And the third time is to give them the capacity to retell it. So I'm building this plan to be successful. And then I'm going to ask questions. And my questions are, what did you like? What questions do you want answered? What do these stories teach us about people? What do these stories teach us about Jesus or God? And what is God teaching us or me in these stories? Those are the 5 questions that are universal that I may intersperse with textual interplays. But those 5 questions at the end of a Bible class or in the middle of a Bible class can take a Bible reading into a Bible discussion that's contextually focused. I'll drop the rest of this here into the chat for a second here. But I think I'm going to start with that. And that's how I'm going to build my plan. And I'm going to allocate time in that plan. Sometimes I even do a timeline that at minute 5, I'm here. Now, that's a higher level of detail than I would necessarily expect, but Michael Walls made a great point that the preacher should model what he expects the audience to be like when he is teaching. So when you're helping people prepare to teach, you need to show them the model that you use and allow them to adapt it to them and then support them in that process. And so that's part of this, how to prepare someone to teach and to lead in these contexts, because you should be doing that to some degree. And we don't always do it well. You can do it formally or informally, but that's something that should be ongoing as part of the work of an evangelist.
And part of what you need to do in that planning is not just the timing, but also you need to have a plan on how you're going to generate discussion. I mean, I think all of us realize that the best Bible classes are not 45-minute lectures. So one of the things you've got to figure out is, what can I do to generate discussion? And it's funny that we're better at generating discussion in kids' classes than we are in adults' classes. And adult classes are where the discussion's probably more valuable than in the kids' classes, because like we generate discussion in kids' classes, then their answers make us laugh, right? We generate discussion in adult classes, and their answers make us think in a lot of places. Yeah. So, but the thing you got to realize about this is you're not going to generate discussion in your class extemporaneously. It has to be purposeful and planned. That's part of your planning. And that doesn't mean that you get 10 questions and you go through one by one. Okay, what's the answer to question 1? In fact, I really don't like that kind of teaching. I'd rather my material I send home with you to prepare you to have discussions, to arm you with things to discuss without me having to tell you this is question number 3. That's my personal style. But figure out how you're going to have those kind of discussions.
And let me illustrate it both from personal failure and some illustrations of great success. So the first adult Bible class that I taught when I was fully supported to preach was this massive plan to teach Isaiah. And lots of failure points in that first attempt. There's a lot of things to think about. But one of the things that's really relevant to here is I gave this large reading list to folks to consider. And I expected emotionally that folks would just be, let's go read it. And we would come to Bible class, to the Bible study, and I realized very quickly that they were not reading what I had suggested they read. At times, even not reading the text of Isaiah that was assigned. And I began to think, now, what part of this is my part of the problem? Because part of it is. And part of it was my expectations were way too high for the spread of the participants in that class. Secondly, what I had suggested was too large of a palette to pick from. And so my current practice as a response to that is to generally encourage one reading level in the course of a study from those who are students. And that is simply to read the scriptures that we're going to be discussing each week. Because here's the illustration. If they don't do that, and you don't do that, there can be no common ground conversation. It doesn't matter what academic level you're looking at, whether it's creation stories with kids, or whether it is an interplay textual study with seasoned Christians. If you don't read ahead of time, there's no conversation. But you've got to pick a level in there of, this is what I want from you. And then if you're a student, by the way, you model that. Like, you go and the teacher says, I want you to have read this chapter. You've read it during the week and the day of the class. Because it really doesn't take a long time to reread a chapter or two. And it's a benefit to you and the other students.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are little things you can do to show that you're prepared, that I think sometimes aren't even necessary, but at least they can be an evidence of an effort. There's sometimes I go back and forth on class PowerPoint. Sometimes it's better than others, I think. Sometimes, though, even when it's not necessary, I'll just have discussion questions in the PowerPoint that maybe were even from the material, just to kind of show a couple of reasons, especially now with the live stream. Maybe somebody's watching that doesn't have the material, but also it kind of says, hey, I put some effort into this. Okay. But especially if you can find, if you're doing like history and geography of the Old Testament, New Testament, put some maps up there. Show some things. There's so much options. So when we talk about preparation effort, and look, preparation effort doesn't always mean that we think you need to read 8 commentaries. Especially for a lot of you that will throw in the non-preacher, we don't expect. Look, I'll be honest. I don't expect you to go out and spend $5,000 on Logos in your lifetime, because it's not your tool like it is for me and for Phil. Now you can spend less and get some stuff that's good. I mean, we've had conversations about that, right? But there's some things you can do. There's lots of stuff. There's lots of free stuff that's out there for you. So if you know you're studying, listen to podcast. We promote sometimes some of the Bible Project stuff. You're getting ready to teach one of their books, go watch the video to see how the book goes together. Those are excellent ways to get an overview. Listen to some podcasts. Listen to some sermons. All of us today, I mean, I don't know about you, Phil, but it feels like I spend a lot of time in my car, which is great podcasting time. It's great time. If I'm teaching Luke, I'm just going to look up some stuff on Luke, and I'm going to listen to it while I'm driving. So those are kind of things you could do in preparation that are really easy, and they're free. Like the podcast thing is free. You don't have to pay for that. So just kind of think along those lines, I think, is in the preparation phase.
Right, and Hal brings up a point that's part of a skill process that can be trained. He identifies the challenge of chasing rabbits, and I want to tie it together with a principle for the other teachers who are now sitting in the pew. We all get excited about different things, and the challenge then is to take that excitement and ask this basic question: can I give a comment in a way that helps the teacher teach the subject he's trying to explain? Yes or no? Can I take what I'm excited about and present it to the rest of the class in a way that doesn't detract from what the teacher is trying to teach? Do I need to respond to the teacher because maybe there's an important point that everybody needs to know? Can I do it in a way that's helpful rather than distracting? See, if you can't say yes to some of these things in the process before you say something, then that's a conversation that takes place with the teacher or with someone else after the class is over, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, not then, because your role in part is to be a helpful ringleader if need be. Like if the class gets off the wheels and the teacher's trying to bring it back, you better be helping them bring it back, because when the tables are turned, how challenging it is to redirect the direction of a Bible class when somebody else is trying to run it off the rails. And so I think there's a spot where the preacher has to accept that role. And I'll tell you, for me, even when I'm excited about stuff in classes, I try to not comment too much because they already hear my voice a lot. And so it better be super needful if I'm going to say something.
Yeah, I give myself a comment limit when I'm not the teacher. And I think that's for preachers,
doesn't do that for you?
No. She just gives me a comment limit at home. But when I'm not the teacher, I give myself a 3 comment limit. Now, Edwin brings something up. What if the teacher says something you think is just wrong? As part of that 3 comment limit, that means I have a 2 comment limit because I got to keep one bullet in the chamber at all times, right? In case we go down this path. Sometimes, by the way, I'm not chasing rabbits. I'm trying to herd them back in with my comments, right? And that's kind of what Phil was saying is you could take this thing the wrong direction. Let me tie this back to me as a teacher. One of the things I hope that the audience does when I'm teaching is respect where I'm trying to take the class to allow me to be the conductor of this train, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what I'm charged to do. And so that's what I'm asking them to trust me to do. When I'm a student, I've got to trust that guy to be the conductor of the train and to let him take it where he needs to take it. He may not take that discussion where I think he should take it, but it's his train to conduct. And my job is to reinforce that, unless it gets into an area that's not good. And then I have a responsibility to try to get the train on the right track. That, by the way, is not just for preachers. It's really for everybody. Everybody has that responsibility. If you see this going in the wrong direction, to try to get it on track. But when it's going on a track that's not wrong, just may not be where you want it to go, sometimes you just need to be a passenger for a while and not comment. Because quite honestly, that's what we want sometimes when we're the teacher. And so you should give that same respect back to them that you desire. And Edwin says he has a comment limit. He doesn't abide by that. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So here's something also that addresses a question of what's the discerning point between false teaching, where this is actual incontrovertible, this is not what God said, he asked us to do something entirely different, versus false information where the teacher may not know things like when and how. Again, you're still going to use those same kind of parameters. Is this something that's a better conversation to have afterwards? Like, is it so vital that I correct this person right now? Because generally speaking, and most of those who are engaged in evangelism can understand some of this, that there's a large emotional buy-in on the part of the teacher to what they're presenting. And so timing your negativity is a big thing, and how you present it, because you're going to need to do it. Like, you can't not do it, but when do you do it is the important process. So generally speaking, if the factual information under play here is going to have a significant impact on the truth teaching aspects of the text, it's a great time to ask a question. Like, hey, have you ever thought about, and intentionally ask the question, acknowledging two things. One, it's possible that the person who's wrong is actually you who think you're right. And so that's why you ask a question rather than declare a new truth. Secondly, with that question, you're going to leave space for the audience to respond and not, okay. And then you might be able to say, because I was thinking about this thing over here that I read, that you can see in the scriptures, that we kind of know. Those are important things. They're all part of the important package of information that we need to bring to the table. Hey, I want to teach well, so I need to also be a good student, and this is what a good student looks like. You may then actually determine, no, this is not something I need to bring up in the question of class, because what he said is commonly misunderstood, but hard to undo in this kind of context. And what I need to do is go talk to him, so maybe he can undo it at the start of the next class in 2 minutes, rather than me stealing 15 minutes of the class.
And so creating a discussion that's not going to go over well, because he's going to dig in more than likely because it's public. Whereas if it was private, you can have a good discussion and sit down and actually have a good discussion. And that's the challenge, right? Is to handle that in the right way. And Wall says if you let something go, it might even learn something. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind is, like you said, sometimes I don't see things the right way. I mean, sometimes this guy can bring something up that is a far better way to think of something if I'll just let him take me there, right? If I trust the conductor, it goes back to that. Just trust the teacher to take you there. It may be better off when you get there, and it may take a moment. And look, as preachers, we've all done that. We've all taken people places we know it's going to be hard for them, and we know it's going to take a while to get there. But when we get them there, then it makes sense. There's the aha moment. But the aha moment, sometimes you got to let the thing go to get to the aha moment. And you can run the thing wrong for the teacher if you're not careful.
Right. And here's another way to think about this. I made this comment a couple days ago, and I'll kind of reiterate it this way. The benefit of expository preaching is that at the very, very minimum, you read the text out loud. So the bare minimum, again, thinking about like expectations of a Bible class on a text, on a expository section is you're going to have that. The bare minimum isn't bad. It's not as good as it can be, but it is not in and of itself bad. And so from there, you're helping someone rise to the next steps of, okay, understanding, interpretive value, acknowledging how we all interpret things through all of our bias, through all of our perspective, through all of our cultural studies. Theologically, we read the text. Historically, we read the text. Those are all next level things that start with reading the text, which is a side note to why you make sure that and here's the thing.
How many times can Phil say read the text, by the way?
I really want people to read the text.
Yeah. He wants you to read the text. Two things Phil wants you to do: read the text and go back to the garden. That's what he wants you to do with every class. Text and garden, text and garden, text and garden. If you guys haven't figured that out in 3 years of Do the Work, text and garden. Thank you.
Hey, look, how much
class over.
Class over. Better off. I want to tie together something from a couple of studies we had earlier this year with Jeff Wilson and Jared Saltz about translation matters. Here's the thing that a teacher needs to do in preparation for that class that I think is really important. Practice pronouncing the text from your preferred translation. If you want to use the King James, awesome, but make sure you can read the King James well. If you want to use the Message, awesome. Make sure you can read the Message well. And understand why you're choosing it versus another translation. So that requires you to do a couple of things. Practice, but like Terry talked about, do some effort. Put some effort in reading that text. Have it read to you by a recording or somebody else. It's a really helpful thing to be able to have that text read. And then also learn that I have good readers in the class. Maybe they read the text for me in the class to make my class better.
Yeah, so Edwin asked a question. This is a great question. And he says, I'm teaching someone, by the way, Edwin's comment limit, I think, is 3, and he's on number 4 today and Do the Work, just per evidence that he does not abide by it. Okay, so I'm teaching someone doesn't abide by the advice you are giving. Now, jumps in with a disagreement and correction. I'm not convinced by their comment. What should I do next? Full disclosure, I'm not good at this because what I want to do is I want to argue with them. And that's not the way to handle that. I think, look, one of the problems with especially preachers is we spend hours and hours and years probably developing our understanding of passages. And then when that gets challenged, we want to go, no, that's not how this is. This is how it is. I'm convinced this is right? I think my best thing there, Edwin, is what I'm having to learn to do is to thank them for their comment. If it's really egregious, like false teaching, you've got to correct it. If it's not, thank them for their comment, hop back on the train. It's not the time. I'm having to learn it's not the time for a confrontation. Because the other thing I've learned about that is this. Doesn't matter if you're right, you're always going to look bad in a confrontation in that setting. Always. Better off not to do it and talk. And that's another, by the way, as Phil said earlier, that's another private discussion after class you can have about your disagreement.
Right. And here's some things that are great boundaries to accomplish that. Number 1, listen well to that conflict point. Also, give them this grace, because it's the same grace that I would want as a student if I came up and said, look, this really needs to be fixed right now. What you're saying is false doctrine. We need to think about this. We can't go any further. So I would say, can you say that a different way for me? Can you phrase it in a different way? While they're phrasing it in a different way, that's the time where you make notes, about, hey, this is what they're bringing up. This is important to them. And then you can come back with them and say, hey, this is what I think you meant by that. This is why I think you would think it's important to you. Correct me if I'm wrong. Very common thing. And Gibbon says, no, that's what I mean. All right. We need to stay on task for the purpose of this class, but we're going to explore this more. And by explore this more, I mean, I'm going to explore more with him, but you may bring it up next week's class. Now what you've done is given him time to clarify, or her, depending on the context. You understand them more. Now you value them because you should. You should value those who contradict with you because of the value they bring. And you've given yourself space to take a breath. And I haven't always done that well, but it's something I try to continue to do better. Is to take that breath and go, it's going to be okay. We got to stay on
Yeah.
topic. We got to stay on task. Now,
By the way,
they may feel real strongly and they may try to fight you on that. That happens.
yeah, one of the things you really got to do in that too, by the way, I think we've all had this issue is sometimes we start thinking about our response halfway through their comment rather than listening. And going back to the having a schedule, having a plan, having a stopping point, one of the dangers of that is you can get so ingrained in that when one of those comments comes up, you just want to end it and get past it and not deal with it. That's not good either. And you want to rush through things. Sometimes what you have to do in this, by the way, and I'm having to learn this because I've not been good at it, is slow down. Like you said, take a breath, hear what they're saying. It's okay to have a pause between what they said and what you start talking in order for you to actually process it. If you need another, you could ask them to re-say it again. You can do something as easy as what Hal said. Hey, some people see it that way. That's a good point. Moving on. You can take the approach of Shane. There's always some nugget of truth in everything. Find that nugget of truth. Build a common ground. Lower your defenses. You can slightly reemphasize your point. You can move on. But the thing is, and I've said what Shane says. Another one is, hey, I used to see that way too. I don't anymore. Here's why. I will tell you, I've done that before, and that didn't go over very well either because, it just didn't, because you can be entrenched. You just got to be careful. And sometimes it's really good to say something first off, thank them for their comment. We want comments, so you don't want to shut them down. And that's the hard part. Sometimes this just needs to be a discussion privately, like Phil said after class. And you may privately discuss it and see that there's some value to that. And the next week, and I've done that, go, hey, last week after class, Phil and I talked about this. Phil had a really great point I wanted to share with you. And you bring it up. You praise Phil for his comment. That encourages other comments. And you do it that way.
Let me add this. You also have to decide what kind of teaching environment am I looking for? Do I want it to be a lecture? Like, you may want it to be a lecture, and you've got to learn to manage it that way. Do I want real interaction? Real interaction is messier. And so you're encouraging constant comments. You want quality comments, but you're encouraging that. So you're going to have to budget for that in your planning for the class, like what we're going to approach. And, you're going to learn folks. And some folks really like to comment in class. And some of them are really great Bible students, and some folks don't like to comment in class, and they're also really good Bible students. So you've got to kind of figure out the space where you fit in based on your personality and your skills and your approach and what you know, and to do it in a way, and this is a challenge, the more you read and the more you prepare, you don't want to present it as, well, I'm right because I've read these 14 books.
You're not the expert, in other words. That's the key.
Right. And it doesn't matter, even if it's a field where you might actually be qualified to be considered a high-level practitioner or even an expert. Like, you still don't need that, because that doesn't actually cause people to change. It causes them to say, well, if I learn enough, I'll be able to prove them wrong.
Yeah, and there's some people in your classes that they put a lot of effort into their study. You just don't realize that. But they do, and sometimes you'll figure that out. It'll come out in the study. They'll surprise you if you allow them to. Yep. But like you said, a class with participation is messy. Okay, by design, you're opening up for anybody to say literally anything. And so you got to be prepared to not take that personally if they disagree with you. I think that's the hardest thing. It goes back to what I said. There's a little bit of the fine line between confidence and pride is very thin. And we all, when we take these leadership roles, regardless of whether it's at work, in a Bible class, at home, we all dance that line all the time if we're doing a good job leading. And that's one of the issues that we have with this, Walls is cracking me up, is that you've got to be very careful that you maintain your confidence to lead without becoming so arrogant and prideful that it detracts from the class. And that's the challenge.
All of these conversations, to get back to the core of our thing, and Walls is trying to corral us back to what he thinks the main topic is kind of simplified. These are the kind of conversations you have with whoever's going to start teaching in the appropriate setting. Um, you know, what about the phrase, teaching to the newcomer visitor perceived lowest maturity? That should be a portion of the material. It shouldn't be the material.
Yeah.
Unless that is the actual content of the group you're teaching. If it's a new disciple class, then that's what it should be. But remember, here's the thing, that's really not the case in most any, even new disciple class, where they're all on the same level, because they bring with whom they to the point of transformation. They bring all the stuff they knew. It just needs to be seen through the lens of a resurrected Savior, which changes a lot of things. It's a jarring experience. So you can think about it this way. I'm sitting in on a lecture series at a high-level academic aspect to the text of Genesis. And a lot of the stuff is pretty focused into that area. It's a jarring experience if I came in there expecting a class on the surface level aspect of Genesis as a literary work. From Genesis 1 to Genesis 50, we're just going to read it and think about what it said. That's different from what is the language interactions and all that stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that in this high-level class, there's nothing for someone who's in the middle like me. What it means is what's there for me is going to be different than what's there for someone who is a great language scholar or has 50 years of preaching experience, or someone who is brand new to a more robust look at the text. You're going to see it in different ways. So the teacher can kind of help create those spaces in there.
I think one of the ways to really handle the newcomer visitor perceived lowest maturity question is this. Just be careful about some of the things that you say that kind of overlook the fact that that person may be in the room. So it doesn't mean that you lower your expectations of what you share, because actually by sharing something with a little more depth, you may encourage that person to go deeper themselves. But I do realize that for a while you might say things in class like, well, look, everybody knows the story of Hosea and Gomer, right? No, that is not true. Like, beyond maybe Genesis 3 and Noah and the ark, not everybody knows all the rest of the stories of the Bible. And they only know Noah and the ark because they sell it at Target for nurseries. Like, that's the only reason they know it, okay? So don't say things like that. And it's as simple as changing your language and just saying quickly, introducing the idea. Hosea is a prophet that God asked to marry a prostitute named Gomer. Boom. You did the same thing in about the same amount of time, and you brought up to speed somebody who may never have heard that story. By the way, I've made those mistakes. It was several years ago, somebody came up and said, you say things like everybody knows about Joseph going to Egypt. I didn't grow up in the church. I don't know anything about Joseph going to Egypt. So a lot of times the way to address those people is not by changing what you teach. It's just, instead of assuming everybody knows, you give a brief introduction for whatever tie-in you're trying to make or whatever. That's the way to handle that kind of skill. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and it's an every generation thing, every person thing. You can't make those kind of assumptions. So 2 points to realize, as someone like myself who did not grow up in a home where congregational attendance, church practice were anything. Like, I didn't go to church from age 0 to 18. It just didn't happen. So I'd be sitting in Bible classes, even at Florida College, and kids would be in the test singing Bible songs to themselves to remember the orders of the kings and the orders of the judges. And I'd be like, be quiet. I'm trying to remember what I tried to memorize. So like, that's a normal thing. How do we make the shift? And that's part of Chris Kramer's, question. Like, we want discussion. How do we make a shift? One, learn to ask questions that are comfortably open-ended. That, like, look, this is an open-ended question, and I know I'm asking an open-ended question. It touches on emotion or feeling. It touches on unknown facts. And be okay with responses that say, from here's the concrete answer that I know, to, like, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. And I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that's great with a great question is one that actually generates disagreement in the audience, because then they can talk it out, right? And you could just, like, By the way, I do that purposely in the high school class all the time. I get the high school kids to fight with each other, sit back and kind of just watch it for a little while, and then we bring
That's
them
just
together
you
to find
like
the
it.
answer. Right. Because it's how they learn. By the way, adults learn the same way. I got to be honest with you. I think if we a lot of times taught adult classes more like we teach our high school kids, we'd have better adult classes. That's just a personal view, because adults don't like to be lectured either. So, and I think one of the things Chris is saying is you want to ask questions or direct the discussion in a way that the students ask questions and then allow the other students to answer. Like, that's the kind of thing that you want to get going in all of that.
Yeah.
So
all of that's kind of framework answers. Specific answers are going to vary. And how do we do it as evangelists is going to be coming down to a very simple process. Sit and talk. Yeah. Model good behavior. Build a relationship with someone at the level that they're comfortable with, so you can give them the encouragement to get to a little bit outside of their comfort zone. And it ties together with something I think is super important. I have often opined that in some ways, Bible class teachers really should be promoted from the adult classes into the youth classes, because those classes for the younger kids are actually as vital in some cases, if not more so, than some of the adult classes that they may teach, and especially dudes. Young men, older men need to be involved in the teaching of the youngest parts of congregations. And they may have to learn it from their spouses, from their daughters, from other members in the congregation in uncomfortable ways, in order to do that, to teach that toddler class, to teach that whatever class. And you should be totally comfortable at one point filling in those roles or teaching a quarter of the baby class. Because look, you do it at home, don't you? You should be able to do it in the congregation.
Sadly, no, dads don't teach babies at home. That's part of the problem. But that's a whole other discussion on Do the Work.
Right. Separate issue. That's it for our time today. We've got a lot more we could certainly opine about, but that's enough to lay on the table for thoughts. I want to thank everybody for their excellent contributions in the conversation to the side with all the chats, the great comments, great insights. I encourage everyone to read through those. There's some good insight there. Looking forward to the days ahead. I want to encourage everyone in this way. I have no idea what tomorrow looks like. I don't know what it's going to be like for teachers and preachers a week from now. I do know there's good we can be doing right now. And if we can help you in some way accomplish the good work of the sharing of the gospel, we want to do that. If you got questions for us, if we can serve you individually in some way, reach out and let us know. Terry, you get the last parting shot before we close off and finish up for today. You got any last comments for us?
I think the thing is, as you said, we don't know what tomorrow holds. By the way, that has nothing to do with the 2020 and pandemic and all that junk. We didn't know what tomorrow would hold in the middle of 2018 either. That's the reality of life. What we do know is who we serve, and we know that He never fails us, and we know that He's always with us. So go do the work. Quit worrying about what may happen tomorrow, and just do the work. Mm-hmm. That's my closing words.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.